We have a really talented panel here today, and I think we're off to a punchy start because we've already noticed that you have sandwiches and samosas at the table, and we don't have any such snacks up here. Although Ratna got herself some, was it lassi? Chai, good. But congratulations on the lassi and the chai. What fantastic food and drink we've had. The chilies? I didn't see that. So our illustrious panel, to my immediate left is, I'm just going to do the briefest of introductions in the interest of maximizing our time. We do have bios in the program. To my immediate left is Anil Shah. Anil is the president of NIMET Metals and Minerals and has been a board member at Trillium Health Center Foundation, as well as on the hospital for the last eight years or so. Obviously, very, very hardworking volunteer in the health sector. To Anil's left, and I'm getting my left and right mixed up, is Zenia Wadhwani. Zenia is someone whom I've known a number of years, going back to Zenia's time at United Way. She is currently the Director of Community Outreach for the Toronto 2015 Pan Am Parapan Games, and has worked, in addition to United Way, has also worked in the past at TV Ontario and the Ontario Association of Children's Aid Societies. Next we have Kulvir Singh Gill, who is the Senior Principal with Clareo Partners, a growth strategy consultancy based in Chicago, currently Chair of the Board of Directors for the William Osler Health System Foundation. And I should say that Kulvir warned us that he might look disheveled today because he just became a father for the second time 2 days ago? 4 days ago, so congratulations. And if that's how you look when you're disheveled, I take my hat off or my turban off to you. And last but not least, of course, is Ratna Omidvar, probably a stranger to no one in the room. Ratna is the president of Maytree, a private foundation that promotes equity and prosperity. And Ratna was a recent winner of the Order of Canada, our illustrious panel. So to get the conversation going, we have a group of really experienced leaders. And I asked people to reflect on a success story and a not-so-success story of outreach into the South Asian community or really any other ethnic or cultural community in the city, to get us thinking about what might be some of the elements of success or, for the sake of a better term, learnings. Ratna, why don't we start with you?
Okay, well, thank you. I didn't expect to be first, but I'm going to start with a success story, and there are so many fantastic success stories. We heard about the Brampton Civic Hospital. We know about the Diwali Gala, the ROM South Asian Gallery, but I'm going to tell you a story that no one has heard about, and I think it was an enormous success. I'm going to make no apologies for the fact that the story is about giving by Canadians back to India. I think I am, at best, the best way of describing me is I'm both a South Asian and a Canadian, and I don't think those are mutually exclusive. I went to India a few years ago and took it on myself to visit about 20 NGOs, and I came back. My heart was very full because I had visited a shelter in India which took young girls as young as 8 away from prostitution and provided shelter, counseling, healthcare, vocational training to them. Some of these women were, in fact, in need of protection from their own families. And they stayed in this shelter for sometimes as long as 10 years, and they were professional staff. They were doctors, psychiatrists, vocational training, and all of that. And when I asked how much does it cost to look after one girl, to remove her from the streets, I was given a pretty astounding figure, a low figure in my mind, $500 per girl per year. So I said, what I can do is raise money in Canada for 20 girls. You know, I give money away, but I hate to ask for money. I mean, this is just, I hate to ask my friends for money. But I said, no, this is something I should be able to do. And I was given wonderful support by Pradeep Sood, who is behind every big South Asian fundraising gala in the city. And we pledged to give 100% of the proceeds away to charity. We would not spend any money on food and drink and flowers and gifts. And so we located a very generous philanthropist who had the event in his back garden. We were fortunate in that we invited the founder of the shelter, who's a very famous South Asian filmmaker called Meera Nair, who founded the shelter. And so soon I was at that incredible position where I had to say no to people. We asked everyone to come to donate $500, and I thought I would raise $10,000. I was astounded at the end of the evening. We had raised $50,000. And so we had raised this money from both Canadians and South Asians. And I tell this story because it helped me overcome my own fear of asking first. In fact, there's a lot of pressure on me to do this annually, and I kind of resist this. I think one of the people I asked is in this room, so she can tell me whether I should do it again or not. But it was an incredibly important success story, because I think when fundraisers or fundraising campaigns look for money, they're sort of held hostage by the big single donor who will put down X million dollars. And I think we should take great pride and solace in the small steps givings, which I'm sure Kulvir will talk about too.
Excellent story. Thank you, Ratna. Why don't we sort of keep going in order? So, Kulvir?
So I have two quick stories. One is the other organization I'm involved with is Habitat for Humanity with the Brampton affiliate, an amazing organization that I joined as soon as I moved to Brampton a few years ago, and I was actually influenced by hearing Jimmy Carter speak about Habitat and his passion for it. And it was something that was amazing, building houses for families in need, giving them a hand up as opposed to a handout. And really passionate about getting on the board and helping Habitat get engaged with the Brampton community, that is the new Brampton, not just the kind of the old guard of Brampton. And some of my contacts with one of the South Asian media organizations gave me a call, and he said, hey, we're holding our annual gala event in one of the banquet halls in Brampton, and we want to give to a local charity. Do you know anybody in mind that would be worthy of it? And I said, absolutely. Habitat for Humanity, amazing organization, building houses locally, helping those in need. I think you should give them. They said, perfect. Can you bring the ED out, and we'll bring them on stage and give them a nice little, a little small donation. We'll recognize them. It'll be fantastic. Perfect. Brought the executive director of Habitat as well as the head of communications at the time, mingled with a bunch of people there, introduced him to as many people as I could, and then when the time came, he was invited onto stage, and I did a quick introduction of them and the organization. It was fantastic. All the media people came up. These are people that are very much leaders in the community, or self-proclaimed leaders in the community maybe, and we got a great signing and picture, and they handed over the check, and we sat down back at the table. And you know, you were wondering, I didn't know how much you were going to get, so I kind of asked the ED, said, so how'd we do? And he opens the check and he starts laughing and almost crying. And he goes to us, well, I think we really got our work cut out. I said, well, what do you mean? And he hands me the check. And the check was written out to Hepatitis Canada. So just to give you an idea of the kind of challenges that mainstream organizations have, even with the wording, and habitat is not a word that's used. India is an English-speaking country, but habitat is not one that comes to mind, and it wasn't even spelt right, and it was one of those days, and we chuckled. But that really highlighted the challenges that lay in front of mainstream organizations in trying to engage with new Canadians, for whom this new style of philanthropy that is just getting beyond giving out blankets and food and clothing and shelter and education, that next level of services, that's a new way of thinking for a lot of South Asians. The success story I'll give you is one that we've referred to before around Brampton Civic Hospital, and the reason I got involved in healthcare philanthropy, when the time came to build Brampton Civic Hospital, it was being built, and there was a huge community giving campaign that started, and many members of the community were involved. Rather than a South Asian strategy, they had the nuance to understand that there maybe should be a Sikh Canadian strategy, a Muslim Canadian, a Hindu Canadian strategy, and really go after the leaders in the community. And when the time came to inaugurate and open the hospital, one of the junior members of the foundation staff had an idea. He says, well, why can we do, I know we're going to do the formal kind of ribbon cutting, but could we do a small prayer service from the different faith groups and have them come and have them do a small, we'll bring in their kind of ministers or pastors or whatever, and have them do something. And thankfully, there was permission was given to try something different. They didn't know really what it was. The foundation staff, the hospital staff, but we'll try it. And so they organized an Akhand Path, which is a continuous reading of the 6 scriptures, the Guru Granth Sahib, and it's a bit of a festivus event, and they thought they were going to have a few hundred people. and they'll raise a few $1,000s. And when they found out it was going to go for 48 straight hours, they're going, oh my God, the logistics, what are we going to do, security, and all that stuff. And they just, okay, we'll try it. I had no association with the hospital at the time. I just went because every single person in the community knew that this was happening. And when I got there, there were probably 15,000 people making their way through this brand new spanking hospital. And there was a prayer service going on. The Guru Granth Sahib was there. The court was in session. There's singing going on. And on the side there was this wall of older white leaders from the hospital and foundation with their jaws open wide as they saw this box, just this wooden box there being stuffed with $100 bills and $20 bills and people pouring money on top of it, people writing checks and putting them in the box there. And it clicked with me that day, is that the day we learn what really motivates a community, how to spark their inner spirit, you've got them. Because the day that Brampton Civic Hospital decided unilaterally to name the emergency department after Guru Nanak, the Sikhs said, well, this is our hospital now. Our Guru's name is on this thing. There's no question about supporting it or not. How could we not support it? And so it's a powerful story of when you can get things aligned, when you can really see the needs of the community, understand the community, set things up in a way that goes to the heart of what the community's passions and dreams are, you can have a successful campaign.
You stole my example. Which I knew you would have. But
Hepatitis happened to you as well?
But because I think it is such a brilliant example of reaching out into the South Asian community. So when I was trying to think of myself of some of those good success stories, and I suspect after a day of talking about this, you probably heard many, I started to think that when you think about reaching out to the South Asian community, there's just some basic principles of when you're reaching out to any community and what practices do you put in place. And so you don't necessarily have to look at the nonprofit sector or the fundraising world to find them. You can actually look at the corporate sector, some of the advertising world to make those connections too. And I'm going to say the name IKEA, and maybe some of you will begin to remember an ad campaign that they did several years ago, Ye Kia, Vo Kia, IKEA. And for those of you who are not South Asian in the room, there's just a play on words that really resonated with the community in terms of using their own words and then bringing IKEA to sort of play into that. I don't know how best to describe Ye Kia, Vo Kia, but... yeah, I did, you did, and IKEA, and it sort of played on very nicely, and it was part of a Diwali campaign in terms of their candle tea lights and how you might be able to bring those into Diwali. But I thought, it was a very thoughtful campaign. There was certainly a South Asian person who was a part of the advertising team who came up with that idea. So clearly, having that inclusion, having that mindset at the table certainly helps to do that. But I think when we think of these examples, we don't necessarily have to go that route. It's about that connection. So what's going to be unique? What's going to be that thing that resonates with them? And I'm sure you've probably also had the conversation, well, that may not resonate with all South Asians, but that's where you begin to think about your own campaigns and what your own objectives are to figure out whether or not that's going to be a campaign that's specifically to the Sikh community or something that's a little bit broader or that's age specific. But there have been several more examples that have come out over the years in terms of that specific campaign that reaches out from a corporate perspective. And I would encourage you to begin to look at those examples because I think there's where you'll find some real nuggets in terms of how are those connections being made.
Thank you. I have always been associated with Trillium Hospital since last 11 years now. And the success story of Trillium's Diwali Gala, I've been part of it right from day one. When one of the Southeast Asian doctor or an Indian doctor, Dr. Singh, he came forward and said that we have to engage the whole Southeast Asian community, or more specifically the Indian community, to come together to build this hospital a little more. And being an orthopedic surgeon that he was, he says, I want the hospital to get me the funds for the new fracture clinic. That's how it started, with the initial idea of being able to raise $75,000 or $50,000 or $100,000. We never estimated that we would cross something around $600,000 or $750,000 in less than 10 years, just 10 years. And to that extent that the success came about, a lot of Southeast Asians, while they helped and assisted, my pitch has always been, then the hospitals are not only for Southeast Asians. The Diwali Gala was for the Indians and the Southeast Asians who celebrated. But the hospitals are for the whites, the blacks, the yellows, and the blues, and the browns. We all need that facility. Why is it that we all cannot join forces together to celebrate Diwali and at the same time raise money? It has worked in our hospital, and we have raised over $5-6 million over the period of last 10 years, and this is the 11th year, and sometime in October, November, we'll be celebrating it again. So I would wish every one of you join us at that time. It's not a success story, but this is a charity which I do support, and it had come about by accident because my mother was stampeded in a temple in India, and she was driven down almost 200 kilometers. 200 kilometers in India is like 2,000 kilometers here, those of you who do not know. But 200 kilometers in a minivan, and the minivan is that micro minivan, I would call it, where with a broken hip, she got transported. Her hip was replaced by this particular doctor. And he found out that she was my mother, and we had got some family relations and connections. So he refused to charge her any money. 6 months later, I ended up going to India. I went and met him. Said, listen, buddy, I can afford it. I would like to pay whatever it costed. He says, no, Anil, I don't want your money. I want some of your time. I need 1 hour of your time today. I had a flight to catch, return back from Ahmedabad. I said, okay, I'll cancel it. Let's go. Do what you want. He took me on the streets of Ahmedabad in a very narrow lanes on his motorcycle. I ended up going to this, a small jungle of building where it was going from small lanes into the building, and it was a polio hospital. All the doctors out there were donating their free time. Every kid who came there was given free services. Every treatment that was given to them was totally free. The food to the children was given free, and the parents of those children, unfortunate children, were asked to stay in one room, which was also provided for free. And I said, where is the money coming from? He said, the money is going to come from you, or people like you. Okay, so I said, is that how I'm supposed to pay back? He says, no, I don't want again your cash. I want you to raise awareness. I want you to raise money for this cause. I was fortunate enough to do that on my 50th birthday. I don't look that old, do I? But on my 50th birthday, I did celebrate there, and I had 300 guests, friends, families, and I asked everyone to write me a check in the name of a local charity who would pay the money to that polio foundation. And believe in me, we raised $35,000 in that one evening. It was an amazing feeling when I handed over the check to the Indian company, the Polio Foundation of Ahmedabad, as I call it, or as they are known. And when I went and gave those checks, tears were flowing in my eyes. Because the child, they cannot even lift their hand up like this. Today, that hospital, fortunately, thanks to the Gujarat government, they have a full-fledged hospital in Gujarat near Gandhinagar. If anybody of you have a chance or opportunity to go there, please do visit it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those stories. And if you'll excuse me, I thought I would share a story as well that is both, actually, I think tells both about success and about a lost opportunity. This is a story that's about 24 years old when I was at United Way in 1989. And we ended up organizing what was at that time, and continued for many years to be United Way's most successful fundraising event, and that was a cricket match at what was then called Sky Dome, is today called the Rogers Centre. It was initiated by a combination of communities from the South Asian community, Black Caribbean community, and as well as the British English community, for want of a better term. the chair and really the inspiration was a South Asian businessman whose name is Ben Senek. Some of you may know Ben. So the phenomenal success of this was, number one, a number of communities coming together. The notion of, well, I think it was Skydome at that point was just literally 3 or 4 months old, so most Torontonians hadn't even been inside it at that point in time. We brought in cricketers from around the world. It was a one-day match of the West Indies versus the rest of the world. They were all name players. And the match raised over $700,000 for United Way, a phenomenal success story at the time. When I look back at it today, I have to say that I think of it as, in many ways as a lost opportunity. For one thing, the cricket match itself did continue for 2 or 3 years after that. And all the players, all the characters or participants wanted more money, starting the second year. Skydome, that was almost free the first year, wanted hundreds of thousands of dollars the second year. The hotels and the airlines and the players all wanted more money. So the amount of money that was raised by United Way went down significantly. But even more importantly, though, as a learning, the community engagement coming out of that never really happened. And so that the community committees that sprang out of that, there was, just because of the challenges of putting on cricket the second time after the wonderful first year, it was just never that easy. And I think it took United Way a long time to rebuild, or at least to try to capitalize on what was, in my view, a series of opportunities that could have turned out very differently. So I just saw some interesting learnings for us. So just on that note, I just ask you, are there any other examples you might have, maybe of things that were not so successful or that could have been done differently in terms of opportunities?
I'm just remembering another fantastic United Way story, which was the Lata Mangeshkar concert,
yes,
which was sold out and raised, I have no idea, Ted would remember how many thousands of dollars were raised. But the trick there was, I think, Lata did it for free. I think in today's world, it's harder to get famous artists to simply donate their time. And I think that's a challenge. In terms of not so successful stories, I'm not going to name any particular institution, but I'm asked at least 4 times a year by a mainstream charity who will come to me and say, we want to raise money from South Asians. We know that they are increasingly powerful, and the conversation very quickly deteriorates down to what are the top 10 names. There is not a question of engagement, and in my view, engagement and philanthropy go hand in hand. And in the end, philanthropy, it's easier to actually simply cut a check than to be engaged. But the engagement is actually far more sustainable in terms of getting to a long-term relationship.
Thank you.
Jump in on that. One of the things I'm sensing, and the entire world is moving to this very short-term sightedness. We're trying to get to the next quarter, to the next year. If we look at the mainstream fundraising capacity that's been developed, mainstream organizations raising hundreds of $millions of dollars, that took decades to occur. It took decades to create a culture of philanthropy in the mainstream, where individuals who, when they're young, they didn't have much, but they built up their businesses, and at the top of the twilight of their careers, they're willing to sign off huge amounts of inheritance onto other organizations to support them. We have to have a little bit more patience, I think, within our community. There are tricklings, and there are some individuals who are very successful, and I'm sure they're tapped out from being asked because they're on everybody's top 10 list. And so if we're trying to engage the South Asian community, I really think we need a 25-year strategy. And that is coming back to the second generation and trying to cultivate philanthropy in that next generation of business leaders, the ones that are still in school. We talked in one of our earlier sessions around a culture of giving is not reserved to donations. Culture of giving is your time, your energy, your spirituality, everything. Every faith has that tenet. Cultivating those people now so that 10 years, 15, 25 years from now, they are giving. We need to have initiatives that are working on both ends of the tunnel here. Yes, we need to raise money for today's priorities, but I think we need to be talking more importantly about what are we doing so that 20 years from now, when the friends of mine that are making hundreds of thousands of dollars today, that are going to have $50, $100 million businesses 20 years from now, that those people are going to have a mindset of wanting to give back. And we've developed relationships with them so they're not just getting cold called when they sell their company for $100 million.
Thank you. In a moment, I'm going to come to you and ask you a question. I think there's often more learnings from things that don't work so well as opposed to things that work well. So I'm going to ask if you have examples that you're willing to share of outreach or events or strategies that didn't work so well, that might be some learnings from. What I'd like to ask you at the panel, really, one thing that struck me listening to your stories is that of success, is that some of them may fall in the category of not traditional mainstream fundraising, but taking different approaches and often involving large groups. I was at the breakout session where Ritu Basa, I'm not sure if Ritu is still here, Ritu was talking about the group. I'm not sure if I got the terminology right, but it's almost a group nature or group mentality that often works very well in a South Asian community. And I just wanted to ask the panel if you have any reflections on that, just the fact that many of our examples were about engaging groups in what might be considered to be non-traditional ways.
So I'll make a couple of comments. One is I want to pick up on something that you were saying just now about reaching out in different ways. And I mean, I think there's a really good example when we look south of the border, not too long ago in terms of Obama's initial presidential campaign, in really going to a grassroots approach in terms of asking for a small amount first before you're going in for bigger amounts. That idea or the concept there can be taken and sort of really work for you in a very different way. If you're looking to, it's a lot easier when you're first stepping into the door of anyone's house, sort of initial marketing campaigns is to, before you jump into the house, you got to sort of knock on the door. And so how are you doing that? How are you initializing that engagement opportunity? So maybe initially it's an ask for their time. Maybe initially it's an ask for a good of service, whether that's food donation or a clothing donation or what have you. Those are the kinds of things that need to happen first, and then you can sort of ask for the $5 or $20 and then the thousands of dollars, and that's how you sort of do that. But I think when you mention about the group idea, I think that there's a concept that probably hasn't been explored enough in my mind's eye, because it's always been of an interest to me, and that's the giving circle. And if you take that concept and sort of bring it in, it's very much sort of relevant to the idea that you were talking about, right, of what you did. You brought together a group of friends, you pooled your money together, and you gave it to an organization. And I think that there's that concept really hasn't been pushed out a lot, and particularly with cultural groups. And so I would encourage you to think about that idea in terms of, because many of these examples are, I talked to my friend, right? And we know how much that person-to-person ask, how much that makes a difference. And so can we encourage that you find that leader? That leader doesn't need to be in that top 10 group. That leader simply needs to have a really good network. And you can go onto LinkedIn or Facebook or anything else to find out how big of a network somebody has. But those connections can be quite good in terms of initializing, that kind of campaign.
I honestly do not have a single not so successful story. But I do have a few things to add to something which you said and she has said it. And at the same time, I also remember some conversation on this particular group which had the breakout session when this young lady was sitting right in front of me. She was moderating that. She said a few things which has really brought me to my attention. First, my definition of an old man and a young man. Let me start with that. A definition of an old man is, or the first generation, or whatever generation you want to talk about, is a person who is very computer illiterate, which is me. I cannot figure out how to get into internet and Google out or something and get the information, dig it out. Whereas anyone who can do that is a young person as far as I'm concerned. Now, I did ask one of my colleagues in my office, and I said, why don't you dig me some information? I'm going to be on the panel member here, and I have to do some research on it. So he sat down on my computer, set up a few words. Here it is. I looked at it. I had so much of information. Mind-boggling, to be honest with you. And it flattered that I had such a intelligent person working for me. And then I looked at all the data up there. Great information. Something, which I had never known, that 51% of donations raised globally are raised at the cash register levels, which basically brings it down to the grassroots levels. There are many people who will give you $10. You're going to have a tough time finding one person giving you $1 million. So basic point of issue I'm making is that we have to go the grassroots level. And this is one of my ideas which I've been propounding with my hospital board, that we all, not necessarily only the Trillium Hospital, whether it's William Olsner or SickKids or anybody, we have to have young directors of our hospital foundation. The young directors of this hospital, someone of her age, younger than that, or a little older than that, as long as they can use the computer, those people need to be brought into the board. It doesn't have to be that the board takes all the decisions. This board basically comes up with ideas. This young blood has got some fabulous ideas. They come out with, like going into the Facebook, Twitters, I don't even remember the names, what they call all these things. But going into the social media, they bring so much of information and at the same time, connections. I was talking to Mr. Agrawal here, I don't know where somebody is. He's saying that he has got 300 people in less than 1 year who are members of his in it. They are doing nothing but raising money and awareness. What is lacking from our perspective? That we are all talking about charities and we're all talking about that we have to raise money. But we really don't see that there is a big amount of money which is sitting there to be picked as long as we can make these people aware of it. And that's
I'd like to use that as a jumping off point, if I may, to a point we were discussing in our conference call a few days ago. We were starting to get into a discussion about, is there a South Asian community as such? And is it appropriate to have a South Asian community strategy, as opposed to perhaps having either a range of strategies or a range of activities within a strategy, knowing how diverse what is referred to as the South Asian community, how diverse that community is. Now, I know, Kulvir, you were touching on some examples at William Osler Hospital, I think. Are there other examples we might share?
Sure.
And also, just I'm interested in your views on, is there a South Asian community?
Sure. I think the word South Asian, I have been very hesitant to use it, even as an identifier for myself, but also as a label for this massive 1/5 of humanity, to put under one label and say that's that homogenous group over there. It's one step better than the U.S. where it's Asian. So you have all of Asia, you have 2/5 of humanity under one group. Where my thinking has evolved is let's if this is a moniker that the community's been given, let's take advantage of it. So when there is a need for us to pool our energy and our resources from an advocacy position, let's call ourselves South Asian, and let's have a South Asian strategy. So if the census numbers are saying that 1 out of every 4 people in the GTA is going to be South Asian, well then that means that funding, resource allocation, HR decisions, policy decisions need to be reflective of 1/4 of the community being of a particular background. But then when it gets into individual programming, I think we need to be more nuanced. We need to then start identifying where are there heterogeneous groups, and then you have to really look at the community. In some areas, parts of town, if you see South Asian, that's going to be great, because there is not a big South Asian community, and it's actually more efficient to keep it together. But if you're in certain parts of the community where there's a Gujarati community and a Punjabi community and a Bangladeshi community and a Sri Lankan community, well, maybe it's worth teasing those out. So I don't think it's a either-or strategy. It comes back to being much more donor-centric in our strategies, rather than saying, here's what fundraising strategy is. I was very lucky when I became chair of the board to go through the AHP primer 2 years ago. And for anybody who wants to be in fundraising as a volunteer, learning the science of fundraising is as important as learning the art of fundraising. But at the same time, though, the science of fundraising talks about the pyramid and major gifts driving the huge component of fundraising strategy. That, I think, we have to change our thinking there as well, because as was alluded to, the majority of dollars are not in the South Asian community, aren't going to come from the folks giving $10 million gifts. In my experience, they're coming from the truck drivers that are giving $1,000 a year, and they're going to keep giving it. Or the village diaspora that's come together and say, on behalf of the elder that founded our village, we're going to collectively give you guys $25,000 every year. That's a new strategy, and that doesn't typically fit into the fundraising paradigm that's been established for mainstream Canada. But that's the evolution in thinking that needs to happen here. And I think South Asian as a concept is that's something that we can use to our advantage rather than it's a one-size-fits-all.
Thank you. I'm going to invite the other panelists to comment on that question. And in the meantime, just because we're running short on time, I'm also going to invite anyone who has either a question or comment and experience to share to please come up to the mic just while our other panelists comment on this question.
So I'm going to answer a question you haven't asked.
Perfect. I've known you long enough, Ratna, that I hoped you would do that.
So the issue is around who asks. And I took a look at some of the research that came out of the Offered group. And it's interesting to note that whereas the fundraising community, the fundraising professionals are out targeting new communities, yet when you look at their internal leadership, foundation staff, charity staff, especially the leadership, is primarily white. So I think if they want to embrace diversity, then they have to embrace it internally as well, because staff and leadership perspectives will help them mold their fundraising strategies.
Thank you. Are there any other thoughts on this question? If there's nothing else from the audience, does anyone else want to comment? And then Aditya, please go ahead.
A question to Ratna. I think you're doing a great job through Maytree supporting projects in Canada. Last time I looked at some numbers in India. City of Mumbai have more millionaires than whole of Canada has. The number of billionaires in India are 48 compared to 25 in Canada. The size and the problem of India is so big that there's nothing we can think, even if we try to devote all the resources we have to address the problem, except sometimes we can feel good that we have addressed because at least one life we have helped. The key question to ask, as a South Asian, as a new Canadian, should we think about giving to the mainstream causes in Canada, or should we mostly think about supporting the causes of native country? That's the question.
And I think we know what Aditya's view on that question is. But
I think there is no easy answer to that. I'm going to hark back to history. When the Irish came, when they were settling down, they supported their own causes. As they progressed in time and became more prosperous, they started to give back to their communities in Ireland. Today, the Irish community is a mainstream philanthropic community in Canada. I can say the same about the Italians. When the Italians came, they were first looking after their own, then they were sending back to their villages. And today, we all know who the big philanthropists in the city are. Many of them are Italians. So it does go back to a question of time. And if we are interested in compressing time frames, which is maybe your question, how can we compress that time frame? I think the democratization of philanthropy through social media and technology is a huge opportunity. You do not need even the $10 gift. You can go on social media and you can raise $1 at a time and finance your one room in one shelter or one tree in one garden, because as we all know, philanthropists are remarkably flirtatious. Today one cause, today another cause. Social media taps into that short-term attention, small giving before they move on to the next. And I think for the South Asian community, which is incredibly tapped into technology, notwithstanding my wonderful colleague here, he's not an old man. I think he wants to pretend. I think here is a great opportunity. Imagine a Diwali strategy, because Diwali is what does unite many of us, not all of us, it does unite many of us. What about $1 a light, and we all donate to something, the United Way or something, or the Community Foundation, whatever. I've heard of a wonderful, brilliant idea from Germany, which is, again, a question you haven't asked, so I'll answer it. Where are some good ideas coming from? In Germany, a private foundation has started a very successful campaign to round it up. This is, again, not $10. Your bill is $9.99. You'll round it up to $10. And they have already raised in 2 short years, I don't know how many million euros. So here is an idea for the entrepreneurs in the audience.
Connecting the 2 points, I think I had a great conversation with an elder in the Jewish community here, and I'll be a little bit politically incorrect. The Jewish community was saying, he looked at the South Asian community, he goes, you guys are where we were 75 years ago, and particularly Punjabi community, you're first generation here, but there's a difference. When the Jewish first wave of Jewish immigrants came to Canada, there was complete exclusion from mainstream institutions. So the Jewish community, as they started mobilizing themselves, there was a need to build their own institutions. There was a need to build their own schools, their own hospitals. At every point in life, they felt that that was the only way they were going to have their needs met. Over time, they've become mainstream, and those institutions have become mainstream. When we're looking at the South Asian community today, there is no need for us to be building our own hospitals. There is no need for us to be building our own institutions outside of that, because we have enough of a voice that we can actually be engaged with those institutions. Me being involved with the Brampton Civic Hospital, where I see tremendous amount of diversity coming into the leadership team there, I say to our community, why would we ever want to build a Sikh hospital? Brampton Civic Hospital is close to a Sikh hospital as you're going to get. But it's also a Muslim hospital. It's also the Portuguese community supports that hospital. What we need to get to a point is we start looking at our institutions as my institutions. I start looking at the ROM, and I see that that's my museum. That's not the museum of the people that live downtown, the elites, or the white, whatever you want to say. I look at that and I see the exhibits in there, and they're reflective of my identity or what I aspire to be. When I start seeing that, then I'm going to want to support it. I'm going to want to get involved. I'm going to want to take my kids there. I'm going to want to have my grandkids coming in there and saying, we helped build that room there. We helped bring that exhibit here. We helped build that out. And that's starting to get to your point of, as generations come, we start looking less and less at where we're from, and we start looking more and more about where we are. And I think that's really going to be the trick. And we're at, like I said earlier, we're at the early stages of that game.
Did you want to jump in, Zenia?
Yeah, I was just going to say, when I was the director of new markets over at United Way, and we had very specific campaigns for reaching out to the South Asian community, for the Chinese community, and for the African Caribbean community. And I remember telling Francis Lankin at that time that if I do my job well, I'll be out of my job really quickly. Because the role is not to necessarily do these segmented, that not all of your campaigns need to be segmented in that way. That if you were far more integrated into your mainstream campaigns and people of all those communities that you're trying to target were reflected in that was successful. Unless you're focusing on wanting to bring a South Asian specific historic exhibit to a museum, or you're living in a community that the density of that population is very strong, like in Brampton, where it's a very strong Sikh community, and that connection to the Vaheguru in the hospital made so much sense. That's a little bit different. But if you're looking to simply engage in diverse communities, engage the South Asian community simply because they reflect a significant part of the population, then look at your advertising and look at your leadership and look at the other things that you're doing where you take a much more integrated approach to being reflective in that manner.
Thank you. Anil, are you okay? Take the question, and then we're going to move to wrap up. So go ahead, please.
In the mainstream, one of the key fundraising strategies is planned giving. I was hoping that it would be addressed, but it hasn't been. I was wondering if you could please speak to that in the South Asian community.
Thank you. Would anyone like to take that, the issue of planned giving in the South Asian community?
Sure, I can say a few words and then please
Okay.
jump in. So planned giving is where you've allocated your assets after your death to a charity or foundation of your choice. The whole concept of inheritance planning is probably a new concept within the South Asian community, because by default everything went to your children, and by default everything went to your male children. All of that is changing, and all of that needs to change. And as people are looking at their kids, the Warren Buffett quote that came up this morning is absolutely smack on. And we want our children to have enough that they can do anything, but not so much that they decide to do nothing. Affluenza is creeping into all of our kids, where there's this sense of entitlement. That, I'm 16, Dad, where's my Beamer? I'm 21, Dad, where's this? I deserve this. Why? Well, because of who I am. You know, I think the compression of timelines is happening very quickly in the South Asian community, and as the community in general becomes more and more affluent, these preoccupations of the middle class or upper middle class or lower upper class, if you want to start coming to our minds, where's this all going? If I give this all to my kids, what are we setting them up for? The conversation is evolving around plan giving, and I think you're starting to see people starting to think about where does it go other than my gurdwara or my mandir or something back home or the rest of my kids. What are mainstream institutions that have been a big part of my life that I want to support? The key point is that what institutions have been a part of my life. If I haven't set foot in your institution, you haven't struck a chord with me while I'm living, I'm probably not going to give you anything when I'm dead. So it's part of the conversation. Let's get to engaging South Asians over the life of giving, starting with the knock on the door, welcoming yourself in, bringing the mother along, and naturally through that conversation, I think plan giving is something you can introduce at the right point in time. But a plan giving campaign within the South Asian community right now is an idea whose time has not yet come, from my perspective.
I think there's some education to be done around that part, because I agree. I'm not sure how much of the community is really doing a lot of that. But if you look at where they're giving most, those are the institutions. It's probably the religious institutions that would have a huge success in doing a little bit of education about that in terms of what's happening to their giving afterwards. And I think they're sort of at the advantage with the community right now, because there is, at least I think for the first generation, a big connection to the back homes, the religious institutions, in terms of where they do their giving. Whereas I feel for a second generation, it's a lot more broad. It's a lot broader than that. It's a lot more mainstream, and I don't think that second generation is necessarily looking for a South Asian specific campaign. They're looking for a connection to a charity that makes sense to them. And so whether they have a family member who's got cancer and that's where they're going to give, or they hear a really good appeal from you in terms of the organization that you're with and the work that you're doing, and that strikes a chord with their interests, whether it's environmental or otherwise, that's going to work for them. So I think that the second generation and the first generation is something that probably also needs to be divided in terms of your strategy.
Well, thank you. I'm so sorry that we have run out of time. There's so many other things we could have talked about, and I'm sure Ratna had many other questions that I could and should have asked, but she'll tell me that later. I think some of the things that we've heard today, I like the notion about overcoming the fear of asking, what motivates the community. I think it actually ties back nicely to what Aditya was talking about in the introduction, the whole question of motivation, the idea of giving circles, giving at the grassroots level, the importance of foundational leadership and representation coming from diverse communities, taking a look at advertising. And I have to say also that this panel has been great with these wonderful phrases. Affluenza, I like that. Philanthropists are remarkably flirtatious. I like that a lot. And of course, I think the winner is certainly Anil's. The definition of a young person is someone who can use Twitter. So we've had a brilliant panel. I'm sure you'll agree. Please join me in thanking them.
So our final speaker this afternoon is Rahul Bhardwaj. Rahul, we've invited to close out this conference. I don't know of anyone else than Rahul who has really touched so many sectors so deeply. He is the president and CEO currently of the Toronto Community Foundation, and he's worked in a number of different areas, worked as a lawyer and on the Olympic bid recently, volunteers with Metrolinx, or works there on the board, volunteers on the board, and has served in a number of capacities, both in social services, arts and culture. I can go on, Rahul. A tremendous speaker, a very thoughtful leader, someone who I personally admire, and I think many of you know him well through the work he's done both publicly as an advocate for our sector, but also for our community at large. So Rahul, please close out this conference for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that very, very, very kind introduction. Well, it's great to see everybody sticking around. You know, it's the mark of a really good conference where people bother to stay to the closing speaker. So thank you very much for that. I'm also keenly aware that I stand between you and the beginning of your weekend. So I promise that I'm not going to take too much of your time today. You know, they asked me to provide a little bit of a recap for the day, but as I was listening to the discussions unfold, I don't think a recap's really going to do it. I think what we should do, or what I propose to do, is perhaps give a starting point to a much broader discussion for you to take away. So this is going to hopefully speak to some of the issues that you've already heard today, but get you thinking from the other side of your brain around what philanthropy is all about. So the focus of this is about South Asian community. I'm going to touch on that a little bit. I'm going to broaden it out a little bit. But first I'm going to take you down to Brazil for a second. And the reason for that is that I was invited to come down to Sao Paulo, Brazil a couple of years ago to talk about philanthropy. So when I got on the phone with them, I said, well, you know, what do you want little old Rahul from little old Toronto to do to talk about philanthropy in Brazil? And they said, well, Rahul, you need to understand something about Brazil. And I said, well, help me. And they said, well, look, in Brazil, charity is the church, and philanthropy is tax evasion. I said, well, that's a really interesting place to start a discussion. And I thought, well, okay, we can really add something to this conversation. So I said to them, what is it about what we're doing in Toronto, and particularly at that time, the Community Foundation, that you think is going to be so helpful in advancing your understanding of philanthropy, particularly in Brazil? And they said, well, it's how you talk about philanthropy at the Community Foundation, and in particular, a phrase that I've been using. And this is kind of heresy to some people when I say, take the money off the table, it's only philanthropy. Because I say, philanthropy is far more than about cutting checks. Philanthropy's become the place where the public sector and the private sector come together to develop innovative solutions to wicked problems. So it's a mouthful there, but it's a lot more different than most people are used to hearing when they think about philanthropy, because they immediately associate it with the money. And I'm going to build a little bit of a case around that, and I want you to take that away and think about it. But here's the real big thesis. If you can appreciate, as a philanthropic organization, we really have two bottom lines to ours. It's a financial bottom line and a social bottom line. Right? You've got to bring the money in the door because you've got to pay staff. You've got to pay your rent. We don't get a discount on hydro, so you've got to pay those things. But at the end of every year, or during the year, the board says to me, great, see all the work we're doing? What have we done to advance the bottom line of our social mission? Because that's what brings us here today. And that's very important to a philanthropic organization. But here's where things get very interesting. If you look at the government, let's call them the public sector for a minute, they've always had the two bottom lines, the social mission and the financial. And the social was, you know, whether it be health care, immigration, or education, always a big deal. The financial bottom line, hey, it's way more acute today than it was about 25 years ago. But where the real opportunity lies is when you start to look at the corporate sector. And they've always had, traditionally, one bottom line. And that would be the financial bottom line, right? That's where the language came from. But what's fundamentally changed in my lifetime, and particularly over the last 10 or 15 years, is now we've got corporations thinking about the social mission bottom line. Whether it's corporate social responsibility or corporate shared value, that discussion is fundamentally different today than, in my experience, it was 15 years ago. And if you listen to some of the private sector individuals who've been speaking today, you'll see it's become a part of their DNA. And you have a whole generation of youth that are going through MBA and other programs that are coming into the corporate sector with fundamentally different understanding of their role and the role of that organization. What does this create? It creates an opportunity. And the opportunity is the alignment of the bottom lines now between the philanthropic, the public sector, and the private sector. And what that has done, folks, has exponentially grown your donor base. If you can think about this, the conversations that are happening right now can and should be fundamentally different than they were before. So now, when we see this emergence of these bottom lines, and now suddenly the messaging and the partners who are attuned to the discussions that we're having around philanthropy, philanthropy now can really take a leadership role in expanding not only what you're doing at your organization, but what your organization is doing as potentially even a city-building institution. One of the aspects of this, too, that I think has really come out is the opportunity as well as the challenge. And the challenge has been somewhat to try to advance the conversation so it's no longer that philanthropy is about remediation. It's not a place that you go to fix things. I think the nature of the discussion is advanced such that now we're talking about how philanthropy and working with the other sectors can actually transform. And once again, I think this has fundamentally changed the discussion that we're having. What it's allowed now is to bring in the notion of risk and innovation. So when you're going to talk to donors or volunteers or even your board, now we're taking a different mindset there. To achieve our missions today, given what's expected of us, we've got to be able to take risk. We have to be able to innovate. And there's never been a better time to have that discussion, because it goes back to the alignment again. So when we're thinking about, and I know I'm talking to folks who go out and specifically ask for money to support mission, I think risk and innovation is something that's welcome as a part of the discussion. And if you're not there yet, in fact, it's actually being demanded. So if it's risk and innovation that are key, there's another part that's come up in my experience over the last while, and that is the philanthropic space has become the space for purpose. We hear it when we hear our donors talk about it so wonderfully, about their passions and what it's made for their life, the ability to give up. It's given them, in many cases, a purpose. When it comes to our volunteers, clearly there's an opportunity here that they're seeing to add enormous value to what they're doing. And don't we know that many of us who work in this space are also driven by that purpose? And that's not something to overlook as well. So when I wrap those issues together and I see what this journey's provided, is an unbelievable opportunity to connect people's hearts and their heads. And once we start to recognize that, we can see that there's a phenomenal opportunity to really engage people, and we've heard that being spoken about earlier, on a fundamentally different way than it was before. Far less transactional, far more transformative. Far less about the money, and perhaps far more about the purpose, or at least having that holistic discussion. And I think that transcends not only what's going on in the South Asian community, but across philanthropy writ large. So let me drill down a little bit now, though, and let's bring it down to what you came here to talk about today, which is about the South Asian community. But I'm going to extend it a little bit more, because I think the South Asian community is an example of a microcosm of what's taking place not only in the GTA in Toronto, but in the province and across the world, across the country. And what I want to do is I want to go back and have a quick snapshot I'm going to give you from our Toronto's Vital Signs report. And it's going to be very specific. But for those of you who don't know about the report, it's something our foundation, Toronto Community Foundation, puts out every year. It's a snapshot on the quality of life of what goes on in the city. For us, it's our strategic guide, right? This is the knowledge that guides our granting, and it's the knowledge and the data set that we share with our donors to provide them service so they can grant for maximum impact. We call that whole little package the art of wise giving, right? It's a lot more than just giving. It's about giving and guiding strategically. But when I talk to you a little bit about this, and I'm going to give you some statistics, I want you to think about it from a perspective of how is your organization going to adapt to these? How are donors potentially going to adapt to some of these changes? And ultimately, how does this volunteers and the whole package work so you're in a position to address not only Toronto's vital signs today, or that slice of it that you work in, but where are you going to be, as Mr. Gill said, in 25 years, right? Where are you going to be getting ready there? So when we look at Toronto, remarkable city, as you all know. But 25% of the population arrived here in roughly the last 30 years. That's a remarkable statistic. That's a remarkable amount of change. But here's the real takeaway. The change over the next 30 years is going to be way faster than the last 25 years. So you have to ask yourself, how are you going to gear up for that? A couple of statistics I'm going to throw at you. All new net growth to the labor force in Toronto will be through immigration. A couple years ago. That year was 2011. So that's how we're going to grow this city. All new net growth to the population of Canada as of 2031 will be through immigration. Declining birth rate, aging populations, that's what the number looks like. We are growing through newcomer communities coming here. We're going to need to adapt, not only for the sake of our missions, but also connecting them on their own journey of becoming Canadian citizens, hopefully. So this is a part of that journey. As we've heard a little bit earlier, we've got close to 1 million South Asians that have come to the city of Toronto or in Toronto GTA. This is a significant part of the population that I know you want to think about, how do you address? But there are two sides of how do you address. There is how do you engage potential donors, those who have amassed assets that can actually help you advance your missions. But what about the other side of the equation too? If you want to have a real discussion with individuals and communities, you better know about their needs. And let's just touch on those a little bit. So although we live in the fourth most livable city on the planet, according to The Economist, and I might add that 3 out of the top 5 cities on that list are Canadian, like Toronto, Vancouver, and Calgary. So we've got an unbelievable thing going on in this country, and Toronto's a big part of that. When you drill down a little bit, though, and you look at what's going on in Toronto, many of you may have seen or heard about the income inequality that has emerged over the last 35 years. I won't go into too much detail, but other than to say, over a time where we've had unbelievable economic growth, we've also created an incredibly stratified city. Right now they call that City 1, City 2, and City 3. And City 3 is made up of low or very low income Torontonian neighborhoods. The takeaway from that is, though 43% of Torontonians live in low-income neighborhoods. That's over 1 million people living there, 2/3 of whom are visible minorities, and I might add that there's a very strong representation of the South Indian community in that as well. So this is something that you need to focus on and appreciate. Another takeaway, though, is, you know that 43% that we're talking about here? Well, by the time we get to 2025, 60% of all Toronto neighborhoods are going to be low or very low income neighborhoods. And if the trend has been consistent from the past, it's going to be immigration that is going to be largely contributing to that. So it's something to be aware of as you move not only through the South Asian community, but as you start to engage with other communities of diverse natures in the city. So the upside is we've got a lot of immigrants that have built this fantastic city, who have done a great job of creating value, and those who have been fortunate amassing wealth. And these are people we want to engage on their journey about building a better city. But by the same token, it's going to be extremely important to understand what the needs of those communities are. Because as you heard earlier, having that connection, that knowledge, and that relevance is absolutely key to the beginning of the stewardship and engagement process and getting to know who these folks are that you want to work with. So, at a very tactical level, when you think about your organizations, how are you set up to manage this type of change? How are you, as Ratna was mentioning, your diversity and your inclusion, not only within your staff, but on your boards and in your policies? And have you had that really important discussion that says, are we set up to go up and out into the community and have the discussion that we know we need? How about the fundraisers? Are they from the community? Do we have relationships within the community? And it's way beyond tokenism, folks. It's about knowing your customer, and it's about engaging with them. It's about resources for marketing. How much is going to be there? And as Mr. Gill said earlier, and I think he made the best point of all, is there's a long-term strategy. How are you going to be, and where are you going to be in 25 years now? And are you as an organization really willing to make that strategic, very important strategic decision of investing for it now to be in that place in 25 years? And I can say even to the donors, some who are in the room too, we've had some fantastic stories. But how do you take your story and spread that in your community? Because really what it's about is a part of the journey of citizenship. And you can hear the passion that's attributed to these folks as they're talking about their role in their communities now. How they've gone from renters to owners, as they call them. They've got some stake in this now. And how do we as organizations engage people on that level and facilitate that process? Because it's far more than just about the money. I want to leave you with the last little piece that'll hopefully bring us back to the beginning. And it goes back to when we had our Toronto's Vital Signs report last year. The media loves to have a little pithy statement that says, so what's the upshot of this and what do we do about it? Last year I said, the tagline for it was, the world needs Toronto to succeed. And the reason I said that was, A, I seriously believe the world needs Toronto to succeed, but why? In many ways, Toronto is the petri dish for globalization. When you look at the 192 nations in the United Nations, you've got a substantial majority of those are represented in this city. We reflect what's going on in the world. But the takeaway from that is how we do it is wonderful. Other cities come to our city to say, how is it that all of your communities live together so well, so harmoniously, with civility, and actually build a wonderful standard of life for each other? They come and they learn, and we need to continue to learn how to invest in that. We're the beacon of hope for a lot of these cities around the world. And how that relates to what we're doing here today, though, is that I often speak about the importance of leadership for the city of Toronto in and of itself, to be a leader in bringing diverse communities together. In the same way, we need to be able to engage members of diverse communities and helping build precisely that type of city. And that's exactly the type of space that I think philanthropy actually occupies. So I'm going to start exactly where I'm going to end where I started, which is let's take money right off the table. And the real issue here in my mind is leadership. And it's engaging with diverse communities, and it's engaging with the South Asian community. But not about the money, but about the leadership. If we can engage more members of our communities, particularly the South Asian community, in the city building exercise of continuing to build the fourth best city on the planet, I think that we have done ourselves a great service. The money will follow. Philanthropy, at least from my perspective, is far more about engagement, and it's all about leadership. So we've heard earlier for some wonderful leaders in our community. I think we've had a wonderful number of roundtables about some specific tactics that you can take away. But perhaps as you're thinking about how do you engage, I would invite you to put leadership at the top of the list. So don't think about the top 10 list of people to go get money from. Think about the top 10 list of leaders that you can actually tap to engage on helping you advance your city, your mission, and at the same time, their sense of purpose. So thank you very much for a couple of minutes of your time to end off today. I think we got a snowstorm outside, so it's going to look a lot prettier, and I trust you'll enjoy your weekend on that.
What a great way to end this conference. Just before you leave, I want to make a few just quick notes here. One, I want to acknowledge the efforts of the organizing committee for this conference. Aditya Jha, thank you, Aditya. Thank you so much for your leadership in serving as our chair for this initiative. Thank you. I also want to acknowledge Archana Sridhar, Ashutosh Jha, Afshan Kohari, Arti Sethi as well. Thank you for your time, your energy, for your recruitment efforts, for organizing food, for the whole thing. It's been a wonderful day. I want to thank all of the speakers and presenters this afternoon. You bring tremendous insights to this world of giving and engagement, and it's incredible to hear from you and to have others hear about your stories and your expertise. I want to thank the Toronto Reference Library, the host, Westbury, and of course the AFP staff. We couldn't really do a lot of this without AFP's wonderful team. So Chris, Dorothea, Jessica, and of course our wonderful Cynthia Quigley. Thank you all for your help. Absolutely. And to our boards, the AFP Toronto Chapter Board, and to our Ottawa Board, members who are here today and who can't be here with us today. This couldn't have happened without your support, and to our AFP Foundation, of course. So continue following us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, follow us on our website, afpinclusivegiving.ca. There's a lot of conversation happening there right now, and it's going to continue for a very long time. We're going to be having a few more of these, actually 10 more in the next 2 years. And the next one is going to focus on Jewish philanthropy. And we're going to make an announcement about when and where in the next few weeks. So stay tuned. afpinclusivegiving.ca is where you're going to get your info. Thanks, and have a great evening and a wonderful weekend.